So you want to know more about the drama that surrounded polygamy and involved Joseph Smith, Orson Pratt, Sarah Pratt, and John C. Bennett in Nauvoo in the early 1840s. My name is Benjamin Park. I'm a scholar of American history and Mormon studies, and a few weeks ago I did a poll on this channel for topics that people want to know more about, and one of those, a topic that I teased in a previous video, was the alleged romantic triangle that took place between the wife of an apostle, Sarah Pratt, married to Orson Pratt, and the president of the Mormon church, Joseph Smith, and his dissenting mayor of Nauvoo, John C. Bennett, and all the accusations that went against each other. So I decided to do a video devoted to that topic because there was a lot of interest in it in the poll. But I'm going to do it in my So You Want to Know More About series that I do every Friday. Now, usually this video series focuses on providing you reading lists, books, and articles that I recommend if you want to learn more about a particular historical topic. But I think I'm going to tweak that series for this video and perhaps some future videos going forward and focus on some primary sources, because I also get a lot of requests from people to talk specifically about primary sources, providing links. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through a lot of the primary source texts, and at the end I'll mention a few secondary books and articles that I also recommend to tease out this complicated topic. And this is actually a great topic to do this on, because what went on in 1841 to 1842 in Nauvoo, we may never fully know with any certainty. This is a good example of how it is impossible to uncover some of these more complicated episodes in the past. But we do have enough to develop the spectrum of possibilities with varying degrees of validity. So let's jump into the history. Let's talk about the basic background to this drama so you can know the context into which to place these documents and questions, which I'll get to in a few minutes. Orson Pratt was one of the early converts to Mormonism. He was short, slim, had wild hair. Here's a picture of him from his early years before the crazy beard days, and he was known as a great missionary. He went out and converted hundreds and eventually thousands to the Mormon tradition. One of those people he converted was a woman named Sarah Miranda Bates, then Sarah Pratt, who he converts and then later goes back and marries, becoming his first wife. Now, once they've joined the church, they moved to church headquarters in Kirtland, then Missouri, and eventually Nauvoo, and then Orson Pratt goes to Britain as part of the Quorum of the 12 missionary labors, a mission that actually saves the Mormon tradition because of all the British converts they come in. And he returns from that mission to scandal and competing claims. And the scandal was this: Joseph Smith, prophet and president of the LDS tradition, had had a falling out with his right-hand man during Nauvoo, John C. Bennett. John C. Bennett was a recent convert that quickly skyrocketed up church leadership, eventually becomes mayor of the city of Nauvoo and the assistant president for the church. But while Joseph Smith is introducing polygamy, it appears John C. Bennett is getting pieces of it. The amount of what John C. Bennett knew about Joseph Smith's polygamy is still disputed among scholars, but it seems like we get these rival LDS leaders practicing some form of sexual experimentation through polygamy, and eventually John C. Bennett is caught out. Emma Smith and the Relief Society start targeting John C. Bennett. I argue in my book, Kingdom of Nauvoo, that it was Emma Smith's way to target Joseph indirectly by going after John C. Bennett. Eventually, while Joseph Smith originally wants to protect John C. Bennett in order to keep the whole polygamous experiment secret, he decides to scapegoat John C. Bennett. He is excommunicated from the faith. He is forced to resign as mayor, but as he leaves, John C. Bennett unleashes a barrage of attacks against Joseph Smith and church leadership. And among those attacks, he alleged that Joseph Smith propositioned plural marriage to several women who were already married to men, including Sarah Pratt, whose husband, Orson Pratt, had been on a mission to Britain. In response, Joe Smith denounces much of what John C. Bennett said. And I want to emphasize, and I'll get to this later, there's a spectrum of things that John C. Bennett says. Some things that seem to be true and other things that are just outlandishly false, so it's often hard to determine what elements of John C. Bennett's expose is trustworthy. But Joseph Smith unleashes a PR blitz against John C. Bennett, denouncing him and specifically denouncing his claims. And Sarah Pratt gets caught up in this because Sarah Pratt backs John C. Bennett's claim that Joseph Smith had propositioned plural marriage to her. And so the church published in their renunciation of John C. Bennett, also published in the church newspaper that Sarah Pratt was having an affair with John C. Bennett, denouncing Sarah Pratt along with John C. Bennett. This left Orson Pratt in a bind, as you might imagine. He is forced to either believe his wife or his prophet, both of whom he was dedicated to. At one point, it became so difficult that he penned a suicide note in the summer of 1842, which prompted a rescue party to go out and find him. After hours of searching, they found Orson Pratt down the river, sitting on a log, looking dazed and confused. It seems pretty clear he suffered a mental breakdown. And while the Quorum of the 12 worked with Orson for several weeks, when Orson refused to publicly back Joseph Smith in defending his character against John C. Bennett's accusations, Orson Pratt was eventually excommunicated in August of 1842. But that's not the end of the story, because in January 1843, John C. Bennett, who is envisioning a way to help Missouri capture Joseph Smith and extradite him back to the state of Missouri, where he could stand trial for treason based on the Missouri War, or more likely be lynched as soon as he set foot on Missouri territory, Bennett believed that he could reach out to allies in Nauvoo to help capture Joseph Smith in a trap. So he sent a letter to Sidney Rigdon and Orson Pratt, both of whom were on the outs with Joseph Smith due to the introduction of polygamy. But Orson Pratt chose not to back John C. Bennett. Instead, he delivered the letter to Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith forgave their previous dispute and eventually rebaptized Orson Pratt, as well as rebaptized Sarah Pratt, and then restored Orson Pratt to the Quorum of the 12, saying that it is as if Orson Pratt was never dropped, which is something you should remember later. While Sarah Pratt is rebaptized, it doesn't seem that she ever rescinded her claim that Joseph Smith had propositioned her as a plural wife. Instead, she remained in what looks, by all accounts, a very awkward relationship with Orson, and she remained a foe of polygamy. She did not like, especially once Orson Pratt starts taking on plural wives. Now, when the Mormons move out to Utah, or at least those who follow Brigham Young, Orson Pratt remains loyal to Brigham Young, although he has a number of disputes, which I'll get to in a bit. Orson Pratt then becomes one of the leading proponents of plural marriage. He is the one who publicly introduces it to the world in 1842 when Brigham Young asks him to proclaim polygamy. And then he continues taking on more wives. He took on 10 wives in total, the last of which was in 1968 when Orson Pratt, now with a bigger beard, this isn't full Orson yet, but this is mid-beard Orson, takes on his 10th wife, a 16-year-old woman named Margaret Graham. That is, 57-year-old Orson took on a 16-year-old plural wife. That seemed to be one of the last straws for Sarah Pratt, who never fully accepted polygamy. While it does not appear they got a formal divorce, they were estranged. And Sarah Pratt started living separately, and that's what led her to start speaking out against polygamy, both in interviews and eventually in a text that I'll talk about later. Orson Pratt himself has a number of disputes with church leaders, especially Brigham Young, to whom he consistently butted head over the Quorum of the Twelve's authority, Adam God doctrine, slavery. He was adamantly anti-slavery, where Brigham Young introduced pro-slavery legislation. These disputes led Orson Pratt in the 1870s. This is full beard Orson Pratt, by the way, when he reaches his full Orson potential. In the 1870s, one of the last actions of Brigham Young's ecclesiastical leadership career is he reorganized the Quorum of the 12, saying that when Orson Pratt was removed from the Quorum, he dropped in status and had to move behind those who were ordained in the meantime, meaning John Taylor. So when Brigham Young died, John Taylor was then the president of the Quorum of the 12 and positioned to become the president of the church, not Orson Pratt. All right, now that you know the basic history of what happened, the context, let's dig into the particulars. Let's talk first about the sources, and then I'll talk about potential theories. Let's talk about the sources. So what backs John C. Bennett's claim that Joseph Smith had propositioned Sarah Pratt? Well, the earliest accounts we have is from John C. Bennett's expose letters, which he published in the nearby newspaper, the Sangamo Journal, which started publishing in July 15th of 1842. Here's the Sangamo Journal newspaper. He later compiled all those accounts, including his own affidavit and testaments from Sarah Pratt, when he published his book, History of the Saints, which he published in late 1842 and then went on a national speaking tour about this. A few notes about John C. Bennett's claims here. As I mentioned before, there are some things that he clearly gets right, that he is an insider on some information of how Joseph Smith is teaching and introducing polygamy. There are also some things that he gets laughably wrong. He claims that Joseph Smith has a harem of hundreds of women, that there's this huge brothel going on, none of which that actually have contemporary evidence. So you're trying to pick out the wheat among the chaff here when you're interpreting John C. Bennett's account, which is what makes it so difficult. Well, what do we have from Sarah Pratt? Well, Sarah Pratt does not speak out on her own until decades later. She starts speaking with reporters about calling herself an apostate and denouncing polygamy in the 1870s. And then in the 1880s, a journalist named Wilhelm Ritter von Wimmenthal, who goes by a pen name, publishes his book Mormon Portraits, which includes his firsthand accounts with several leading Mormons, including with Sarah Pratt. And it's in this book that we get her firsthand story that she claims happened of what took place in Nauvoo. Now, notably, like with John C. Bennett, there are some things where it's clear she is an insider information on this, and other things that seem clearly doctored. She talks about some things that took place in Nauvoo, especially the practice of abortion, that just don't fit within the historical context. For instance, she talks about abortive practices that weren't in existence. So you're trying to tease out the principles of potential truth that are valid among all this stuff that can't fully be trustworthy. By the way, I will be posting links for all these primary sources in the description so you can check them out on your own. Okay, so what primary sources do we have to investigate Joseph Smith's claim that it was John C. Bennett having an affair with Sarah Pratt? Well, as I mentioned, there was a church PR blitz in response to John C. Bennett's accusations, where they tried to gather testimonials and arguments to discredit John C. Bennett, poke holes in his arguments, and in turn, discredit Sarah Pratt and her claims. That include testimonials from the non-Mormon mayor Jacob Backenstoe, as well as the Mormons, the Goddards, who were Sarah Pratt's landlords. All of these testimonials, or many of them, were published in the church's newspaper, the Wasp, in the July 27th, 1842 issue. Again, the link you can find in the description. Like the John C. Bennett documents, however, these testimonials should be interrogated because they are written with a purpose. They are part of a broader PR push, and so they are trying to push a particular message, which means we can't take them at face value. We do have one other source that I think is important to consider. Someone who lived in Nauvoo, later leaves Mormonism, but had connection to the saints, was a woman named Mary Eddy V. Smith. She writes some reminiscences that are mostly condemning of the Mormons, trying to play up the salacious nature of anti-polygamy, but she actually backs the Joseph Smith claim that it was John C. Bennett who had an affair with Sarah Pratt. I'll put the link to that document in the description as well. And then we have the suicide note from Orson Pratt, because if we can't be 100% sure what happened with Sarah Pratt and either Joseph Smith or John C. Bennett, what we are sure is Orson Pratt didn't know who to believe, and we have this poignant suicide note. Here it is. Here's what the text says. I am a ruined man. My future prospects are blasted. The testimony upon both sides seem to be equal, the one in direct contradiction to the other. How to decide, I know not, neither does it matter. For let it be either way, my temporal happiness is gone in this world. If the testimonies of my wife and others are true, then I have been deceived for 12 years. My hopes are blasted and gone, as it were, in a moment. My long toils and labors have been in vain. If, on the other hand, the testimonies are true, my family are ruined forever. Where then is my hope in this world? It is gone, gone not to be recovered. O God, why is it thus with me? My sorrows are greater than I can bear. Where I am henceforth, it matters not. I'll add a link to the LDS catalog for this document, although they don't have the scans online. So, what do we do with all this? How do we interpret the documents? Well, I think I want to emphasize, I don't think we'll ever know for sure. I don't think historians can ever be 100% confident on what happened in 1841, 1842 Nauvoo with Sarah Pratt and either Joseph Smith or John C. Bennett. And that ambiguity should be at the forefront. With that said, I think there's a few things that we can feel somewhat confident about. So here are a few elements of the story that I feel somewhat sure should play a role in how we interpret it. One, Sarah Pratt hated plural marriage. She hated it in Nauvoo. She hates it for the rest of her life. So we need to keep that in mind. Two, her marriage with Orson had problems, both at that time and further. We have plenty of evidence showing that there were marital issues at the time. Three, Joseph Smith was known to proposition the wives of other men, including church leaders. So it's not out of the realm of the possibility that he could have propositioned Sarah Pratt. And that includes one of Orson Pratt's close friends and fellow apostles, Heber C. Kimball. But that's a story for another day. Four, both Joseph Smith and John C. Bennett were known to exaggerate things about the other, especially during this heated time, which means we have to take both of their claims with a grain of salt. And five, everyone, and that includes Sarah Pratt, had motive to stretch the truth of what was going on. So, what are the possible interpretations? Well, one, there seems to be a binary that everyone often buys into that I actually have a problem with. The binary of decisions that either Joseph Smith was right and Sarah Pratt was just having an affair with John C. Bennett and now they tried to cover up, or that John C. Bennett was right and that Joseph Smith tried to proposition Sarah Pratt and that's what happened. I don't really buy that binary, though. I think it's too divisive. I think it gets caught up in these partisan wars of 1842. My guess is that there's a mixture of all these elements at play. It could be that both John C. Bennett and Joseph Smith targeted Sarah Pratt. It wouldn't have been the only time in Nauvoo where Joseph Smith competed with another Mormon leader over a prospective plural wife. So maybe both were going after Sarah Pratt. Or maybe Sarah used John C. Bennett as a way to attack polygamy, which she abhorred, meaning that maybe she exaggerated a story or came up with something because she knew these polygamous proposals were going on and she wanted to serve as a face for it. We now know the stories of survivors are often mixed in these communal identities and narratives, and maybe that was in place in Nauvoo. Because, and I want to emphasize it, I think it's important that we need to consider Sarah Pratt's motives and especially the way she exercised agency in this. Notably, after this whole fracas, she chose not to follow John C. Bennett. She decides to stay with Orson Pratt, and she decides to get rebaptized in the LDS Church. Now, of course, there are some practical, social, circumstantial matters that probably play into it. She did not have full freedom to do whatever she wanted, but I think we need to unpack why she did that. She had particular interests. Maybe she was partly interested in remaining in Mormonism, but purifying it from polygamy, and those accusations was one way she hoped to head off the polygamy stream. That's just one potential hypothetical. And I think we need to consider those interests. We may never fully know what happened, But I think when we interpret these people as three-dimensional figures with a variety of interests at play and refusing to accept the false binary, even more possibilities arise. Okay, it would not be a "so you want to know more about X" video if I did not give you a reading list at the end. Besides all those primary sources I outlined, here are some of the most important books and articles you might want to read. If you want something quick and online and available, I strongly recommend Richard Van Wagoner's dialogue article, Sarah Pratt, The Making of Apostate, which is a much longer story of Sarah Pratt's life, but of course has quite a bit on that story if you want to dig deeper. If you want to see perhaps the most confident of interpretations, Brian Hales' trilogy of Joseph Smith's Polygamy makes the argument where he backs Joseph Smith. I know that's not going to be a surprise to many. And even if I disagree with some of his interpretations, his book at least foregrounds the primary sources and allows you to enter in the debate, so I recommend it. If you want some scholarly works that survey this topic, even if they don't come down firmly on one side or the other, admitting this historiographical ambiguity, you have Andrew Smith's biography of John C. Bennett, Saintly Scoundrel, The Life and Times of Dr. John Cook Bennett. You have Breck England's The Life and Thought of Orson Pratt. And if you want the broader story of Orson Pratt's continued conflicts with first Joe Smith and then Brigham Young, I strongly recommend Gary Bergera's book, Conflict in the Quorum, which is a great overview of Orson Pratt's relationship to church leadership, which is always fascinating. Anyways, I hope this video made sense. Now that you are becoming an expert in the topic, after digging through the primary sources, go ahead and leave your thoughts on the comment, your theories. Like I said, I'm not wedded to any particular theory here. In fact, I think that there are multiple potential interpretations. That's why history, and a rigorous history, is important. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, share it with others, subscribe to this channel if you have not yet. History has never been more relevant than it is now. These discussions are difficult, but they need to happen, which is why I'm happy to have them with